Today I'm going to be painting this mandala on an oval stone. I've been getting a lot of requests to do something other than a round rock, so I chose an oval one, which totally counts. And to find the center of this one, I used the very scientific method of eyeballing it. I just guessed, and then I use a compass to kind of check to see if I did start my mandala here, where would it line up on the stone. It looked like it was pretty centered to me, so I just kind of went with it. The one thing I really had to work on this one is to make sure that the mandala was going to line up perfectly on the oval. In order to do that, I had to make sure that these first dots lined up with the sides and like the top and bottom of the oval. So when I paint my mandala, the points of it will go towards the sides and the top and bottom. This will let the mandala look very symmetrical on this stone, and not that it's like twisting to one side or the other. I did not want that. So I just spent a lot of time making sure that I was getting this as evenly spaced as I could, because this is going to set up the rest of the mandala, and if this part was off, then the whole thing would have been off. Once I got there, I just kind of went in and just started building out this center section. So the more I build this section out, the more petals I can put on the mandala, because I'll have just more space when I get to the bigger dots. Also, since I don't have guidelines on this one, a trick I've learned to just kind of help me keep all this symmetrical is when I'm placing these dots, I do every other dot. And the reason why is because in general on these types of pieces, if I do every dot in a row, you tend to have a tendency to kind of lean towards one side or the other. So your dots won't actually be lined up. A trick I've learned is to just do every other dot, and that just kind of helps me visually see that space and see the line that I'm creating, and helps me keep everything like evenly spaced. So I end up getting a better result on these flatter pieces when I do every other dot. Next, I knew I was going to do like this whole purple and gold theme on this one. To place these dots here, I am just using a nail dotting tool. And I've been getting asked a lot of questions about this tool. This is actually an embossing needle, and I just use that to drag dots and to make the swipes, because it just has a really nice sharp point on it, and it makes it really easy for me to get into like those really tight spaces. Before I had that, I used to use like thumbtacks and toothpicks and all kinds of different things, but the embossing needle is just easier to hold, and it's just a really good tool for me to use for that. The black tools you always see me using for like these larger dots, this is called a punch set. It's actually a hardware tool, and one side of it has like a flat side that's like perfectly round, and they come in all kinds of different sizes. So it's something that I've always used to place my dots. I started dotting before they had like official like dotting tools out there. Now there are a lot of different companies making dotting tools, and they all are basically the same idea. They usually come in several different sizes, and it's all like the flat surface with different size dots that you can make with them, but they will just be like a little bit larger and they fit in your hand better. I personally just like the smaller ones because they take up less room, and it's just what I'm used to at this point. I know exactly which tool I need to grab in each situation, and just very comfortable with them. So that's why I continue to still use the punch set. So it's just a personal preference for me, but there are lots of different options out there. So at this point, I built out that center of the mandala pretty well, and now I'm going to go ahead and start building out all the petals. So I am just kind of going in with a smaller nail dotting tool and just slowly walking the dots around. And when I do this, I just load the tool up with like a lot of paint, and as I slowly make my way around, I have less and less paint on my tool, which will create smaller and smaller dots. It creates this really cool effect and adds a lot of depth to the piece, and it's just something that I just really enjoy doing, so I tend to do it pretty often in my work. Walking the dots does add a lot of time to these pieces. I always keep that in mind as well. It's a lot quicker doing one with just like all swipes, because you can just do a swipe and move on, but the dots always tend to take a lot more time. But I really enjoy the way it looks to have like all these dots and these nice neat rows all lined up, and it just creates like a lot of depth, and it's just a really cool thing to see visually, and it's very satisfying for me to do and actually paint. And it really becomes like this meditative process for me, because the only thing that matters is placing that next dot. It's a way for me to just kind of calm my mind. So it does end up being a form of meditation for me. I really enjoy this part of the process, and you'll see me doing this a lot in my work, and it's just because I just like the way it looks, and it's very therapeutic for me to even paint these. At this point, I am realizing that I'm getting towards the edge of that circle, which means I'm getting towards the edge of the stone, so I needed to figure out some type of way to kind of finish this section off and to see what I was going to do next. I did know that I wanted to go in with some more gold and just kind of outline this section of the mandala, but I thought it would be best to kind of use a big swipe here. I'd done with those little bitty swipes in the center, so I wanted to bring some of that out, and it just kind of helped define this area and kind of separate it some from whatever I was planning on doing on the outside. And at this point, I had no clue what that was going to be, so I thought having this big gold line would really help me define these two areas so it doesn't all just kind of blend in together and you can't really tell what's going on anymore. To do this, I'm just loading up the tool with like a lot of paint, and I just leave a big dot and start dragging it out, and then I'll just go in with this embossing needle and just very slowly drag that paint into that little space. Now I knew I needed to do something else in this little section here. I decided to just do some like little purple swipe kind of petals. I just load that up with a lot of paint and just use a needle just to kind of drag it out. I usually do like one side and then slowly drag out the other sides to just kind of make a nice little swipe. I end up doing this going all the way around, just trying to keep everything as symmetrical as possible. And I'm really using that guy line there to place that dot right above it, so that way they will all just kind of line up and just create this nice circle going around the center of the stone. Next, I knew I was going to go in with some light purple in between the gold and the dark purple and create like another swipe. So I just loaded up with a lot of paint, and then I'm going to drag out the line closest to the purple first. And then I'll just slowly just kind of adjust it to kind of fill in that space. This will just create a really nice shape for the swipe. And then I'll just go in and do the same thing on the other side. I was really happy with the shape that this ended up creating, and I knew it would be like a nice focal point for the center of this stone. As I'm working my way around doing the rest of these, I'm also already trying to figure out what I'm going to do on those side pieces, because at this point, I still have no clue what my next plan is. Eventually, I decide that I have enough room to place a really big dot here and to be able to work a petal out on the sides, but I'm not really sure how that's going to work, if I'm going to end up adding some smaller petals to the side or what the actual plan's going to be. But the first part of figuring it out was just to place this dot and see where that would take me. I liked the pattern I did in the first sections. It's like, well, I'm just gonna kind of repeat it on this one dot and just see what I'm left with and what I can come up with from there. I slowly dragged this gold paint around the dots, and with this I am not using the needle, I'm just using the dotting tool because it was short enough that I was able to use the dotting tool to make the paint go all the way around without using a needle. And then I just went in and did some small walking the dots, and I was really loving the way that this was coming out. I still couldn't visualize what I was going to do with all that extra space around it, so I decided to just focus on the petal itself. I'm just going to do this petal, and I'm just going to see what space I'm left with afterwards, and I'll just figure it out from there. I'm sure something will work out. So that was my thought process going into this part of it, because really no plan other than paint this petal. I kept it the same as the section before, just going from the gold to the dark purple to the light purple, and I had enough room to go in and do the gold outline on the side too, because I thought this would separate this petal from whatever I was going to do on the sides. So with this one, I had a little bit more of a distance to go with the gold paint, so I had to dip my tool into the paint a couple of different times to be able to make it go all the way around, but it created like this really beautiful swipe. And then came the part where I had to figure out what was coming next. I really enjoyed the gold, and I thought it was like a nice touch right here, so I was like, well, I can do another swipe right beside it in gold, and that would just kind of highlight that section, give it its own little moment, and it will help fill in some of this space that I still have no plan for. But once I did that, I was like, you know what? I kind of really liked doing these swipes on the side. What if I just went in and did these big purple swipes going around it, just kind of framing this whole section out? And then that's when I came up with the plan, because at that point I was like, I'm really liking this, and I just kind of stuck with it, and that became the theme to the outside. It's just doing these really thick swipes wrapping around this last petal, which will just kind of end up framing out the sides of the stone. I decided to continue this pattern of just going back and forth from the light purple to the dark purple, and just working my way around and just kind of seeing how this was going to end up turning out. So with all these swipes, I'm just really taking my time, just trying to make sure to get them as nice and even as possible and just kind of working with the shape that I have left. So as I work my way around, the swipes are getting a little bit shorter, but I'm still keeping them pretty thick on the ends just to kind of fill in more of that space. And in the end, I ended up being able to fit just enough to kind of complete this section and finish it off. But I still had just a little bit of space left after I finished this one. So I decided, you know what, I'm just going to do one more, just kind of squeeze it in right here, and end up having like a very small little tail on it. I just had just a little bit of room to kind of make a little swipe here, and I thought that that would complete this little section. I went ahead and just started on the top dots next, and when I was going in for these top dots, I realized that I didn't really like that last swipe. I felt that it was looking a little too busy and it was just kind of all running together, and it just, I wasn't a fan. So I knew I was going to go in and change it. So once they had dried, I went in with a toothpick and just kind of like slowly scraped them off. And once I got that off, I just kind of touched up any section I needed to with some black paint. And I actually tried gold next because I thought the gold would kind of like frame it, but it was horrible. And so I wiped that off, and then I just went in with the darker purple, and the darker purple seemed to do the trick. It kind of went with the theme of the whole stone, and it just finished it off nicely, and it made it like a more of a darker border going around, so it was less busy, and it kind of separated the section without drawing too much attention to it. So I ended up being a lot happier with this decision. Once I completed all these swipes, I just go in and do the last few top dots. It ended up being a fun project, just kind of playing around with a different shape and trying to figure out how I was going to fill in this space. If you have any questions, just leave a comment down below, or if there's something in particular you would like me to do a video on, let me know. I'm going to be working on a lot of YouTube videos. And here is the finished piece. Thanks for watching.